The sirens of Kyiv wailed into the cold night air. Families scrambled into shelters, children clutched in arms, the ground trembling with the echo of distant launches. Above, far beyond the sight of the human eye, a Russian MiG-31 had just unleashed Moscow's most fearsome weapon, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. For years, the Kremlin called it unstoppable, a weapon moving 10 times faster than sound, maneuvering in mid-air, invisible to defenses. Russian state TV boasted, "There is no shield, there is no escape, this is the future." As the missile streaked toward Ukraine's capital, its shockwave tore through the sky. In Moscow, generals already prepared the headlines. Another strike, another reminder of Russia's power. But in a darkened control room near Kyiv, Ukrainian operators were calm, almost silent. Their screens flickered. The faint trace of the incoming missile appeared. Fingers hovered over launch keys. One word was spoken: fire. A Patriot PAC-3 missile leapt into the night, a spear of fire cutting upward. For seconds that felt like hours, the two weapons raced toward each other, one descending with unstoppable speed, the other climbing with deadly precision. Then the sky erupted, a flash brighter than lightning, a roar that shook windows for miles. The unstoppable had been stopped. The myth had been pierced. And the world would never look at Russia's hypersonic dream the same way again. The Kinzhal, or dagger, was never just a missile. It was a message. In 2018, Vladimir Putin stood before the Russian parliament and unveiled what he claimed was the crown jewel of Moscow's new superweapons. With a triumphant grin, he played animations showing missiles weaving through defenses, diving toward targets at speeds the world had never seen. "No defense system can stop it," he declared. The Kinzhal was the weapon meant to terrify NATO, to remind America and Europe that Russia could still outmatch them. On paper, it was fearsome. Launched from high-speed MiG-31 interceptors, it boasted a speed of Mach 10, 10 times faster than sound. It could maneuver in flight, making interception nearly impossible. It could strike targets up to 2,000 kilometers away, carrying either a conventional or nuclear warhead. To Moscow, it was more than a missile. It was invincibility cast in steel. Russian propaganda went into overdrive. State television broadcast endless footage of MiG-31s roaring into the sky, missiles slung beneath their wings. News anchors told audiences that the West had no answer, that the Kinzhal would render NATO powerless. And the world listened. Western analysts debated nervously. Could this really be true? Could Russia have leapt ahead in missile technology? Journalists ran headlines about the hypersonic gap. Politicians warned of a new era of strategic imbalance. The myth of the Kinzhal began to spread far beyond Russia's borders. Then came the war in Ukraine. From the very first months of the invasion, Russia used the Kinzhal as a weapon of terror. It struck ammunition depots, bunkers, even civilian infrastructure. Each time, Moscow boasted that Ukraine could do nothing to stop it. "No defense exists," they repeated. Each launch was not just destruction, it was theater, designed to remind Ukraine, and the world, of Russia's supposed superiority. But the truth was more complicated. Behind the myth, cracks appeared. Military experts noted that the Kinzhal was not a revolutionary design at all, but a modified Iskander ballistic missile mounted on a MiG-31. Its hypersonic label was technically true, but misleading. Almost every ballistic missile travels at hypersonic speeds when descending. What mattered was whether it could truly outmaneuver defenses. Still, the fear lingered. Even NATO commanders wondered if their systems could cope with it. For Ukraine, the stakes were clear. The Kinjal was not just a weapon, it was a psychological bludgeon. Every time it was fired, it carried with it the weight of inevitability. Civilians felt powerless. Soldiers braced for impacts they could not prevent. The missile's reputation was almost as devastating as its explosions. And that is why destroying it mattered so much. Ukraine did not just need to defend its cities, it needed to shatter the illusion, to prove that the so-called unstoppable could, in fact, be stopped, to turn Moscow's proudest boast into ashes. Somewhere in NATO command centers, planners saw the same need. Together, quietly, they began to prepare. A codename was whispered: Operation Shadow Spear. It would be the operation that turned myth into wreckage. The Kinjal terrified civilians, but it terrified generals even more. For months, Ukraine had endured the missile strikes, each impact shaking not only buildings, but morale. Russia called it unstoppable. Western analysts weren't sure. Some believed it was just theater. Others feared it was truly invincible. Ukraine couldn't gamble. If the Kinjal remained unchecked, Russia would hold the skies as a weapon of blackmail. Something had to change. And so, behind closed doors, a plan began to form. In late 2022, convoys rolled quietly through Europe, carrying crates marked with a name long respected: Patriot PAC-3. These weren't just missiles. They were the most advanced air defense interceptors the West could provide, built to stop the fastest, deadliest threats in the world. Officially, they were a defensive measure to protect Ukrainian skies. Unofficially, they were a spear aimed directly at Russia's myth of invulnerability. But Patriots alone weren't enough. Against something moving at hypersonic speeds, Ukraine needed more than launchers. It needed a net. That net stretched across nations. Satellites from the U.S. provided early warning the instant a MiG-31 took off with a Kinjal beneath its wing. Polish and Romanian radars added coverage. European AWACS planes circling high above the continent tracked trajectories with surgical precision. Every piece was linked to Ukrainian command centers, where operators sat in dimly lit rooms, eyes fixed on screens. Each signal, each heat signature, each electronic pulse fed into a single system. The brilliance of Operation Shadow Spear lay not in a single weapon, but in the fusion of many. A missile might outrun one radar, but it could not outrun them all. Technology alone doesn't win battles, people do. Ukraine's air defense crews trained relentlessly. They rehearsed scenarios night after night, timing every step. Detect, track, lock, fire. Seconds mattered, literally. At Mach 10, the Kinjal could cover a football field in the blink of an eye. Operators drilled until their reactions became muscle memory. NATO advisors worked side by side, guiding, adjusting tactics, refining software. Ukrainians absorbed it all, determined to master the system. Inside their bunkers, they spoke little. The gravity of their task needed no words. They knew that when the time came, hesitation meant death. Whispers spread that the Patriots in Ukraine weren't standard. Engineers had quietly uploaded new algorithms designed specifically to track hypersonic threats. Classified updates fine-tuned the interceptor's seekers, sharpening their ability to adjust mid-flight. Whether true or rumor, one fact remained. These weren't just air defense missiles. They were experimental weapons, sharpened for one task: to pierce the myth of the Kinjal. Every mission needs a name, and this one carried weight. They called it Operation Shadow Spear. The metaphor was deliberate. The Kinjal was Russia's dagger, its unstoppable blade. But shadows could hide spears, silent and unseen, waiting for the right moment to strike. For Ukraine's defenders, the codename was more than strategy. It was a promise. The next time Russia unleashed its unstoppable missile, the world would see it fall. As winter deepened, tension mounted. MiG-31s were seen on satellite images, lined up on airfields, Kinzhals mounted beneath them. Western intelligence warned that another strike on Kiev was imminent. In bunkers beneath the city, crews waited. Launchers stood ready, their long canisters tilted toward the sky. Computers hummed, radars scanned, headphones crackled with quiet static. There was no panic, only silence, discipline, and the weight of expectation. Because everyone in that room knew, history doesn't always wait for battles. Sometimes it comes in the form of a single missile, flying faster than sound, carrying with it the myths of an empire. And sometimes history is written in the seconds before impact. Operation Shadowspear was ready. The order came just after midnight. Somewhere deep inside Russian territory, a MiG-31 roared into the sky, a Kinzhal missile slung beneath its belly. Satellites picked it up instantly. Analysts in NATO command centers leaned forward as alerts rippled through the network. The call went out to Kiev. Launch detected. Kinzhal in the air. Inside a fortified Ukrainian bunker, operators straightened in their seats. Screens lit up with trajectories, timers, and warnings. The mythical weapon was on its way. At Mach 10, the missile could cover a kilometer in less than a third of a second. From launch to impact, Ukraine had barely a few minutes. Every second mattered. Track confirmed, an operator reported, his voice calm but clipped. On his screen, a faint arc traced across a digital map, heading straight toward the capital. The commander gave the order. Shadowspear active. Patriot batteries around Kiev powered up. Hydraulic arms tilted toward the heavens. In their underground control stations, crews locked in coordinates. The air was heavy with silence, broken only by the hum of electronics and the rapid tick of clocks. Civilians on the streets of Kiev heard the sirens first, a long, mournful wail that rolled across the city. Families clutched one another and ran for shelter. Children were lifted into basements, subway stations filled with frightened faces. Above them, invisible, the Kinzhal screamed closer with each second. In the Russian cockpit miles away, the MiG-31 pilot felt confident. He had launched the unstoppable. His generals told him there was no defense. He would return a hero. Back in Kiev, the network was alive. Polish radars fed updates, American satellites refined trajectories, Ukrainian operators fused the data into a single picture. The Kinzhal was coming in fast, low, and deadly. Target locked, came the call. The commander's hand tightened into a fist. He gave the order with a single word. Fire. With a deafening roar, a Patriot PAC-3 missile leapt from its launcher. A column of fire lit the night as it streaked into the sky, twisting and turning as its seeker locked onto the descending Kinzhal. Operators held their breath. The room was silent, but for the sound of rushing air through headphones and the faint crackle of static. On the screen, two dots closed in on each other at unimaginable speed. High above Kiev, the two missiles met. For an instant, the night sky turned brighter than day. A massive explosion shattered the silence, rattling windows for miles. Civilians hiding in shelters felt the earth tremble, believing the strike had landed. But when they emerged seconds later, they saw something astonishing. Fiery fragments streaking downward, scattering across empty fields outside the city. The unstoppable had been stopped. In the Ukrainian bunker, the green dot that represented the Kinzhal vanished. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a cheer erupted, loud, raw, filled with disbelief and triumph. Soldiers hugged one another. Some laughed, others cried. They had done the impossible. "Direct hit," an officer confirmed. "Target destroyed." The myth was over. Villagers outside Kiev were the first to see the evidence. Burning fragments landed in fields and roadsides. Farmers filmed twisted shards of metal, glowing red in the night. By dawn, images spread across social media. Unmistakable wreckage, serial numbers, scorched casing. Proof that Russia's dagger had shattered. In Russia, panic turned to spin. The Ministry of Defense insisted there had been no interception. State television claimed the missile had completed its mission. But the pictures told another story. The wreckage was undeniable, and the world saw it. For the Kremlin, it was humiliation. Years of propaganda had promised invincibility. Now their wonder weapon lay in pieces for all to see. As the sun rose over Kiev, people poured into the streets. They had heard the sirens, felt the tremors, braced for disaster. Instead, they saw survival. For the first time, the Kinzhal had been stopped. President Zelensky addressed the nation. "They said there was no defense. They said we could only hide. But tonight, Ukraine proved that myths can be destroyed. The unstoppable has fallen." The crowd erupted in applause. For a people under siege, this was more than a military victory. It was hope. Within hours, headlines flashed across the globe. Ukraine shoots down Russia's hypersonic missile. Kinzhal destroyed over Kiev. The unstoppable falls. In Washington and Brussels, generals studied the data, proud but also exhilarated. Operation Shadow Spear had not just defended a city, it had rewritten the future of warfare. The age of fear was over. When the fireball lit the skies over Kiev, the shock was not confined to Ukraine. Within hours, the world knew Russia's so-called unstoppable missile had been destroyed. The reverberations were immediate, and they were seismic. In Moscow, panic collided with pride. The Ministry of Defense rushed to control the story. Spokesmen declared that the Kinzhal had completed its mission successfully, that Western propaganda was spreading lies. Anchors on state television dutifully repeated the script. But the truth was harder to bury than wreckage. Videos from Ukrainian villages showed twisted fragments scattered across the ground, unmistakably bearing the markings of Russia's hypersonic missile. Farmers posed with shards of burned casing, pointing to serial numbers. Satellite imagery confirmed debris fields. No denial could erase the evidence. For Vladimir Putin, it was humiliation. The Kinzhal had been his personal boast, a cornerstone of his speeches, proof that Russia possessed weapons without equal in the world. Now that claim lay in ashes outside Kiev. Inside Russia's armed forces, disbelief turned to dread. Officers had sworn that the Kinzhal could penetrate any shield. Pilots who carried them believed they were wielding a sword that could never break. Now, confidence cracked. If the Invincible missile could be destroyed, what about the others? What about the Iskanders, the Kalibrs, even the hypersonic Zircon Russia promised was on the way? For the first time, soldiers whispered openly, "Maybe our weapons aren't what they told us." In Ukraine, the atmosphere was electric. Crowds cheered in city squares. For once, the sirens had ended not in destruction, but in triumph. President Volodymyr Zelensky stood before the cameras, his words firm and victorious. They promised the world a weapon that could not be stopped. Tonight, Ukraine showed that nothing is beyond our reach, nothing is beyond our courage. The shadow spear has pierced their myth. For Ukrainians, this was more than a tactical win. It was emotional liberation, proof that the terror which haunted their nights could be defeated. Children waved flags, soldiers sent videos from the front, smiling for the first time in weeks. The victory was shared by millions. In Brussels and Washington, the strike was studied with forensic detail. NATO generals congratulated Ukraine's crews, but they also knew what it meant for the alliance itself. The Kinjal had been marketed as a weapon to terrify the West. By intercepting it, NATO's systems had proven their worth. A U.S. Air Force general put it bluntly. Hypersonic doesn't mean unstoppable. Integration beats intimidation. The success validated years of investment in radar networks, satellite constellations, and advanced interceptors. It showed that Western systems, properly trained and connected, could do the impossible. And it sent a message to every adversary watching: myths can be broken. The fallout reached far beyond Europe. In New Delhi, Indian defense officials who had once considered buying the Kinjal as part of their cooperation with Moscow went silent. Opposition lawmakers demanded answers. Why invest in a weapon already defeated? In Beijing, Chinese strategists scrutinized the reports with cold calculation. Their own hypersonic programs, particularly the DF-17, suddenly looked more vulnerable. If the Patriot could down the Kinjal, perhaps it could down theirs too. Across the Middle East and Africa, where Russia hoped to sell its weapons, doubts spread. Contracts wavered. Buyers hesitated. Moscow's arms industry, already strained by sanctions, faced another devastating blow. On the internet, the battle raged as fiercely as in the skies. Hashtags like Kinjal down and Shadow Spear trended globally. Memes spread, showing the missile crashing in flames, paired with captions like "Unstoppable," "Stopped," and "Putin's dagger broken in two." For Russia, the information war was another defeat. Their triumph had become the world's punchline. For Ukraine, it was a propaganda victory of the highest order. The footage of the intercept, shared millions of times, inspired hope not only at home, but abroad. In capitals from Berlin to Tokyo, leaders asked the same question. If Russia's hypersonic missile can be stopped, what else can? The Kinjal had been the sharpest edge of Moscow's intimidation. Now, dulled and broken, it revealed something deeper, that Russia's power rested on myths as fragile as glass. And once shattered, those myths could never be rebuilt. When the fragments of the Kinjal lay scattered across Ukrainian soil, the blast wave carried far beyond the battlefield. It shattered not only a missile, but a myth. For years, Russia had told the world that its hypersonic arsenal was untouchable, unstoppable, unbeatable. On that night over Kiev, the illusion burned away in a single flash of light. The Kinjal was never just steel and fuel, it was theater, a weapon of propaganda as much as destruction, designed to frighten enemies and reassure allies. Putin had unveiled it as proof of Russian genius, a promise that Moscow could leap ahead of the West. But myths have limits, and when technology meets determination, illusions collapse. Ukraine's interception showed that even at Mach 10, speed alone is not supremacy. That a network of radars, satellites, and disciplined operators could see through the haze of fear. The Shadow Spear pierced not only a missile, but the very narrative of Russian power. The lesson was clear for the world's militaries. The future belongs not to single, superweapons, but to integrated systems. No matter how fast, no missile can escape the gaze of 1,000 eyes connected as one. no matter how advanced, no technology is invincible. For NATO, the intercept was validation. For Ukraine, it was liberation. And for Russia, it was humiliation. The moment when its proudest claim dissolved into smoke and twisted wreckage. From Washington to Beijing, defense planners studied the data. Hypersonic terror no longer looked inevitable. If one could be stopped, others could too. The arms race shifted overnight, away from fear, toward resilience, toward networks that left no shadow unlit. And in the minds of millions, something changed. Civilians who once huddled helplessly under sirens now looked upward with hope. The unstoppable had been stopped. The nightmare had been broken. As dawn broke over Kiev, the air was cold but clear. The city still stood. Its people still breathed. And above them, the sky was no longer a place of helpless fear, but of defiance. Operation Shadowspear proved a simple, devastating truth. There is no such thing as invincible. Not missiles, not myths, not empires. The age of